Most people spend their entire lives running from something that was never chasing them. Today we stop running. Good evening, my friend. Wherever you are right now, whether you're sitting in a quiet room, driving down a long road, or lying awake in the dark hours when thoughts grow loudest, I want you to stop for a moment. Just stop and listen closely, because what I'm about to share with you is not new. It has been known by the wisest men and women who ever walked this earth. But somewhere along the way, in the noise of daily living, it got buried. Tonight we dig it back up. We are going to talk about fear, not in the way most people talk about it, in hushed tones as though naming it gives it more power. No, we are going to look at it directly, the way you'd look at a shadow on the wall. Because the moment you turn on the light, the shadow disappears. That is exactly what we are going to do tonight. We are going to turn on the light. Let's begin with the truth. Fear, in its most primal form, was given to us as a gift. The kind of fear that pulls your hand back from a flame, that is the body's intelligence speaking. That kind of fear is not our subject tonight. Our subject tonight is the other kind, the kind that lives in the mind. The fear of failure, the fear of judgment, the fear of beginning, the fear of not being enough, the fear of being seen, or worse, the fear of being invisible. That kind of fear is not instinct. It is a habit. And I want you to sit with that for a moment, because it changes everything. A habit is not a life sentence. A habit is simply a pattern of thinking that has been repeated so many times, it begins to feel like identity. But it is not who you are, it is only what you have practiced. Now, I have studied human behavior for a great many years, and I have come to one inescapable conclusion about fear, the kind that holds people back from the lives they were meant to live. Almost none of it is real. Oh, it feels real. I won't dismiss that. The racing heart, the dry mouth, the voice inside that says you can't, you shouldn't, you won't, those sensations are real enough. But the thing they are pointing to, the catastrophe they are predicting, in the overwhelming majority of cases it never arrives. People go to their graves having suffered through thousands of futures that never happened. They paid full price for events that were never delivered. What a terrible bargain that is. So how does a person break free? How does a man or woman step out from behind the long shadow of fear and begin to live, truly live, with confidence, with purpose, with the kind of quiet courage that doesn't need an audience? It begins with understanding. The great philosopher William James, one of the finest minds this country ever produced, said something that I have carried with me for years. He said that the greatest discovery of his generation was that human beings can alter their lives by altering their attitude of mind. Just that, alter the attitude of the mind. Not the circumstances, not the people around you, not the economy, not the weather, not the past. The mind. Because here is what the mind does not tell you: it is working for you, not against you. It is simply executing instructions. And most people, without ever realizing it, have been giving it the wrong ones. Every time you imagine the worst outcome, you are giving your mind an instruction. Every time you tell yourself, I'm not the kind of person who does that, you are giving your mind an instruction. Every time you rehearse failure in your imagination before you've even attempted anything, your mind says, understood, and it goes to work making that vision real. Turn that around. Use the same mechanism in reverse, and watch what happens. Here is the central truth of this entire conversation. Fear and purpose cannot occupy the same mind. Fill yourself so completely with a reason to move forward that there is simply no room left for hesitation. Read that again, slowly. The fearless man is not the man with no fears. The fearless man is the man who has something bigger than his fears. He has a purpose so clear, so genuinely his own, so worth pursuing, that when fear shows up at the door, and it will, he simply nods, steps around it, and keeps moving. Purpose is the cure, not bravery alone, not willpower alone. Purpose, when you know why you are doing something, when it is tied to your deepest values, to the people you love, to the person you are committed to becoming, fear shrinks. It does not disappear overnight, but it shrinks. And every time you act in spite of it, it shrinks a little more. Now let me give you something practical. Because wisdom without application is just beautiful noise. There is a method used by men and women of great achievement throughout history, and it is remarkably simple. They did the thing they feared immediately. Not someday, not when conditions were perfect, not when they felt ready, immediately. Because here is what they understood that most people never learn: readiness is not a feeling. It is a decision. You will never feel completely ready. The fear will always be there, at least at first, whispering its predictions. But the instant you take the first step, the instant your foot moves, your hand reaches out, your voice speaks, something extraordinary happens. The fear begins to dissolve, not completely, but enough to take the next step. And the step after that, Ralph Waldo Emerson said it plainly, do the thing, and you will have the power. Not before. After this is one of the most important sentences ever written about human potential, and it is almost universally ignored. People wait to feel powerful before they act. The truth is precisely the opposite. You act and the power follows. Now, there is another dimension to this that few people examine carefully enough, and that is the question of whose fear you are actually carrying. Sit with this. Think back to the fears that live most persistently in your mind. The fear of embarrassment, the fear of standing out, the fear of trying and failing publicly. Ask yourself honestly, where did that come from? Was it something you concluded yourself through careful reasoning? Or was it something you absorbed from a parent who warned you to be careful, from a teacher who told you to be realistic, from a society that rewards conformity and punishes originality? Most of the fear people carry is borrowed. It was handed to them, without malice, by people who were themselves afraid. And because it arrived early before the mind had the tools to examine it, it was accepted as truth, as fact, as self. But it was never yours to begin with, and you can return it. Gently, without bitterness, without blame, you can examine each fear, hold it up to the light, and ask, is this actually true? Does this serve me? Is this mine? You will be surprised how many fears cannot survive that simple examination. Let me speak now about self-image, because it is the foundation of everything we have discussed tonight. The psychologist Dr. Maxwell Maltz, a brilliant man who spent his career studying how people change, concluded that a person will never consistently act in a way that contradicts their self-image. The picture you hold of yourself in your own mind is the ceiling of your performance and the floor of your fear. If you see yourself as someone who is timid, who always hesitates, who never quite measures up, your mind will faithfully produce evidence to confirm it. Not because it is cruel, but because it is thorough. It is simply doing its job. Change the image, and you change the behavior. Begin today, not someday, to speak to yourself as the person you intend to become. Not as the person you have been, the person you are becoming. This is not self-deception. It is self-direction. It is the most powerful thing a human being can do with the extraordinary instrument of the mind. My friend, we are drawing near to the end of our time together tonight, and I want to leave you with this. Fear will always knock at the door. That is simply the nature of a life being lived fully. The person who never faces fear is the person who never attempts anything worth attempting. So we do not seek a life without fear. We seek a life in which fear is a visitor, not a landlord. You are not your fear. You are not the hesitation, the doubt, the voice that lists all the reasons why not. Those things are habits, old programs running on new hardware. You are capable of something far greater than you have yet demonstrated, not because I say so. Because the history of every human being who ever overcame their limitations says so, and they were not different from you in any essential way. They simply decided firmly, finally, without negotiation, that their reason for moving forward was larger than their reason for standing still. Make that decision tonight. I want you to think back, not too far, just back to when you were very small, before the world had a chance to sit you down and explain itself to you. Back when you would walk up to a complete stranger in a grocery store and start a conversation without a second thought. Back when you would stand up in a room full of people and sing, badly and beautifully, without the slightest concern for what anyone thought. You were not born cautious. You were not born hesitant. You came into this world with your arms wide open. So the question worth asking, the one most people never stop long enough to consider, is simply this. What happened? Here is what happened. Somewhere along the way, someone grabbed your arm as you reached for something hot. Someone raised their voice when you wandered too close to the street. Someone said, be careful. And they meant it with every ounce of love they had. And your young mind, which was designed to learn at a breathtaking speed, did exactly what it was designed to do. It learned. It cataloged that moment. It filed it away. It said, the last time this happened, something uncomfortable followed. Let us be cautious next time. And cautious you became. Now understand, that process is a miracle. It is the mind's extraordinary ability to protect you, to adapt, to grow wiser through experience. That mechanism is not your enemy. That mechanism has kept the human race alive for thousands of years. But here is where the story takes a turn that most people miss entirely. That same mechanism, the one that was designed to protect you from genuine danger, does not know the difference between a hot stove and a telephone call. It cannot distinguish between a speeding car and a new business idea. It processes a public presentation and a physical threat with the same circuitry, the same racing pulse, the same cold sweat, the same urgent whisper that says, stop, retreat, stay where it is safe. And because that feeling is so visceral, so physical, so deeply familiar, most people assume it is telling the truth. They assume the danger is real. They pull back, they wait. They stay in rooms that are too small for them, living lives that were designed by their caution rather than their courage. But now, and I want you to feel this settle into your mind like sunlight through a window, consider what it means if that response was simply taught to you. Not handed down by nature, not wired permanently into your character, simply taught. The way you were taught to tie a shoe, the way you were taught to read. Because anything the mind has learned, the mind can revisit. It can examine, it can gently, deliberately replace. You are not permanently anything. You are a work in progress with extraordinary tools at your disposal. The timid child who learned to hold back, that was a response to a world that was still being explained to him. You are no longer that child, and the explanation at long last is yours to rewrite. That is where freedom begins. I want you to think about someone you admire, someone you consider genuinely brave. Perhaps it is a person from history, a soldier, a pioneer, a leader who stood firm when everything around them was uncertain. Perhaps it is someone closer to home, a parent who kept going when keeping going seemed impossible, a friend who walked into a difficult room and said the difficult thing that needed saying. Now I want you to consider something about that person that most people never stop to examine. They were not without doubt. They were not without that quiet, unsettling feeling that perhaps this was a mistake. That perhaps the odds were against them. That perhaps the sensible thing, the comfortable thing would be to simply step back and let someone else carry it forward. They felt all of that, every last bit of it, and they moved anyway. Now here is where most of us have been given the wrong picture. We have been shown courage as something dramatic, something that arrives fully formed in the chest of extraordinary people. People built differently from the rest of us. We have seen it in paintings, in statues, in stories told around fires for centuries. The jaw set firm, the eyes clear, the hands steady. No trembling, no hesitation. And so we sit quietly with our own trembling hands and our own hesitating hearts, and we draw the only conclusion that seems logical. We are simply not that kind of person. But that conclusion, my friend, is one of the most expensive mistakes a human being can make, because it is built entirely on a false premise. The premise is this, that the brave person does not feel what you feel. They do. Every surgeon who walked into a difficult operation felt it. Every entrepreneur who signed the papers on a venture that could have gone either way felt it. Every parent who had to make a hard decision for their family, every artist who released their work into a world that might not receive it kindly, every ordinary man and woman who ever did something genuinely difficult, they all felt that same sensation in the chest, that same voice that said, "Are you certain about this?" The difference was never the absence of that voice. The difference was what they placed against it. They placed something heavier on the other side of the scale, a purpose, a commitment, a person they loved, a version of themselves they refused to abandon. Something so genuinely important to them that when they weighed it honestly against their hesitation, the hesitation simply lost. Not because they were fearless, because they were decided. And that is a distinction worth carrying with you for the rest of your life. Fearlessness is not a personality trait you either possess or you don't. It is a calculation. It is a question you answer every single morning when you wake up. What matters more? The moment you answer that question honestly, not with the answer you think sounds impressive, but with the real answer, the one that lives in your gut, something shifts. The weight redistributes. The path that looked impossibly steep begins to look like simply the next step, and then the one after that. You were never waiting to stop feeling uncertain. You were waiting to find something worth being uncertain for. Find that thing, name it clearly, write it down if you must. Hold it up against every hesitation that comes your way, and then move. Not because the path is clear, not because the outcome is guaranteed, but because what waits for you on the other side of that decision is the only version of your life that was ever truly yours. That is where courage lies. Not in the absence of the feeling, but in the presence of something greater. I want you to try something right now. Something simple. Something that will take no more than 10 seconds of your honest attention. Think of something that genuinely troubles you. Something that has been sitting quietly in the back of your mind, the way an uninvited guest sits in a corner of a room, not loud, not demanding, but present, always present. That low hum of unease that follows you into the morning and tucks itself beside you at night. Hold that thought clearly. Feel its weight. Now and here is where I want your complete attention. Think of something you are deeply excited about. A goal that genuinely belongs to you. A vision of your life that makes something in your chest lean forward. Something you would pursue with everything you had, if only the path were a little clearer. Hold the thought now. Feel its pull. Notice something. You cannot hold both of them with equal force at the same time. This is not poetry. This is not motivational language designed to make you feel temporarily inspired before the ordinary world rushes back in. This is how the human mind actually operates, and understanding it may be the single most practical piece of knowledge you ever apply to your own life. The mind, remarkable as it is, works very much like a garden. It will grow whatever you plant in it with consistency and care. It does not discriminate. It does not editorialize. It does not look at the seed you are pressing into the soil and say, "Are you certain you want more of this?" It simply grows what it is given. And most people, without ever making a conscious decision to do so, have been planting the same seeds every single day for years. They wake in the morning, and the first thing they rehearse is everything that could go wrong. They sit with their coffee and mentally catalog their inadequacies. They move through their day running a quiet, nearly inaudible commentary in the background of their mind, one that predicts difficulty, anticipates rejection, and replays old failures with the dedication of a film projectionist who only owns one reel. And then they wonder why the garden looks the way it does. Here is what they have not yet understood, and what I want you to understand deeply, in a way that genuinely changes how you begin each morning. That internal commentary is not reality, it is a habit. A practiced, deeply grooved habit of mental attention. And the same mind that learned to run that commentary can learn to run a different one entirely. Not through denial, not by pretending the difficulties don't exist, but by making a deliberate, daily decision about what receives the majority of your mental energy. William James, perhaps the finest psychologist this country ever produced, spent decades studying how human beings change, and he arrived at a conclusion so simple it almost seems too modest for the decades it took to reach it. He said that the art of being wise is knowing what to overlook. Read that slowly. Know what to overlook, not what to solve, not what to conquer, what to overlook, because the mind cannot simultaneously expand toward a vivid, meaningful purpose and contract around a catalog of worries. One will always crowd out the other. The question, the only question that matters, is which one you are deliberately, consistently, consciously feeding. A person with a compelling purpose does not become immune to difficulty. The obstacles are still there. The uncertainties remain. The odds do not reorganize themselves out of courtesy. But something fundamental changes in the relationship between that person and their circumstances. The purpose becomes louder than the noise, not all at once, not overnight. But gradually, the way a fire builds, slowly at first, almost tentatively, and then with a warmth and a light that makes the darkness around it seem almost irrelevant. That is what a genuine purpose does to a mind that has been given over to it fully. It does not eliminate the darkness. It simply makes the darkness less interesting than the light. So here is the practical truth I want you to carry forward from this evening. You cannot fight your way to peace of mind. You cannot wrestle your troubles into submission through sheer force of will. That approach exhausts the fighter and leaves the trouble standing. But you can redirect. You can, beginning today, not someday, decide what your mind spends its best hours building. You can choose a purpose clear enough, personal enough, and genuinely important enough that it begins to occupy the space where doubt once lived. Feed it with your attention every morning. Return to it every time the noise grows loud. Write it down, speak it aloud, let it become the organizing principle of your daily thinking. And watch, with the patience of a gardener who trusts the process as the garden begins slowly and then remarkably to change. The mind is yours. Every hour of every day, you are either giving it something worth growing, or you are letting it grow what the wind brings in. Choose deliberately. Choose daily. Choose the purpose over the noise, the vision over the worry, the life you are building over the life you are afraid of losing. That is not optimism. That is not wishful thinking. That is simply how the most extraordinary minds in human history kept themselves pointed toward the light. Feed one, starve the other, and begin tonight. I want you to think about the last time you were on the edge of something. A decision that needed making. A conversation that needed having. A door that needed opening. You knew what was required. You could see it clearly enough. And yet something kept you exactly where you were, not moving forward, not retreating entirely, just suspended in that uncomfortable space between knowing and doing. And here is what I want you to notice about that space. The longer you stayed in it, the larger everything looked. The conversation that needed having began to feel like a confrontation. The decision that needed making began to feel like a gamble. The door that needed opening began to feel like it led somewhere dangerous, though you had no real evidence that it did. The thing itself had not changed. Not one detail of the actual situation had shifted, but your experience of it had grown considerably heavier. That is not coincidence. That is cause and effect. There is something the human mind does during prolonged stillness that nobody warns you about when you are young. It fills the silence. It cannot help itself. It is an engine that was built to run, and when you do not give it useful work, it generates its own. And the work it generates in the absence of forward movement is almost never constructive. It rehearses worst outcomes with the thoroughness of a trial lawyer preparing a losing case. It finds patterns in old memories that confirm current doubts. It builds elaborate, detailed structures out of pure speculation, and then presents those structures to you as though they were fact, as though they were inevitable, as though the outcome were already determined and the only sensible response were to remain exactly where you are. This is the mind in stillness, busy, loud, convincing, and almost entirely fictional. Now here is what changes the moment you move, not after you have thought it through completely. Not once you have eliminated every possible risk, not when conditions finally align and the timing feels perfect, because I will tell you plainly, my friend, that moment rarely arrives on its own. It is manufactured. It is decided. It is created by a person who chose motion over deliberation at the precise moment when deliberation had already gone on long enough. The moment you take the first step, even a small one, even an imperfect one, the mind shifts its entire orientation. It stops building cases against you. It starts solving problems for you. Because now there is something real to work with. Now there is actual information coming in, not speculation, not projection, not the elaborate fictions of an idle imagination. There is the ground beneath your foot. There is the response from the other side of the conversation. There is the page with the first sentence on it. There is evidence, real and present, that the thing can be done. And that evidence, however modest it may be at first, is worth more than any amount of mental preparation that preceded it. Ralph Waldo Emerson, one of the clearest thinkers this country has ever produced, put it in a single sentence that I have returned to more times than I can count. He said, "Do the thing and you will have the power." Not before, after. This is perhaps the most consistently misunderstood principle in all of human achievement. People believe that confidence is what produces action. They sit and they wait for the feeling of readiness to arrive, as though it were a train with a published schedule. They say to themselves, when I feel more prepared, when I feel more certain, when I feel more like the kind of person who does this sort of thing, then I will begin. But the feeling does not precede the action. It follows it. Every person who has ever built anything worth building discovered this truth personally through experience, the hard way. They acted before they were ready. They spoke before they were certain. They began before the plan was complete. And in the doing, something arrived that no amount of preparation could have delivered in advance. They became capable of the thing by doing the thing. There is a concept that the ancient Stoic philosophers understood with remarkable clarity, that the obstacle and the path are not opposing forces. The obstacle is the path. The resistance you feel at the edge of action is not a signal to retreat. It is a signal that you are standing at the exact place where growth occurs. Every craftsman knows that the material pushes back. Every builder knows that the structure resists before it rises. Every worthwhile endeavor presents itself initially as a problem to be solved rather than a gift to be received. The person who understands this does not interpret that resistance as a verdict on their ability. They interpret it as confirmation that they are in the right place, doing the right thing. At precisely the right moment, they lean in, they move. And the resistance, as resistance always does when met with consistent, deliberate motion, begins to give way. So I want to leave you tonight with something simple enough to act on before this day is over. Identify the place where you have been suspended, where you have been doing the very human, very understandable thing of thinking instead of moving. And then, not tomorrow, not after one more conversation with yourself about it, take the smallest possible step forward. Not the whole journey, one step. Because that one step will do something that months of careful thinking never could. It will show you that the ground holds. And once you know the ground holds, once you have that knowledge not as an idea but as an experience living in your body and your bones, the next step becomes easier. And the one after that easier still. That is how stillness becomes momentum. That is how hesitation becomes history. Move, my friend. The power is waiting on the other side of the first step, exactly where it has always been. I want you to think about two different people facing the exact same situation. Same room, same opportunity, same odds. Same unknown standing between where they are and where they want to be. The first person walks in and something inside them quietly contracts. Their shoulders carry a tension they may not even be aware of. Their voice, when they use it, arrives slightly smaller than the moment requires. They perform adequately, sometimes remarkably, and yet there is always a ceiling, an invisible one that nobody else put there. One they assembled themselves, piece by piece, over many years, without ever quite realizing what they were building. The second person walks into the same room, and something inside them quietly expands. Not arrogance, not performance. Something steadier and more genuine than either of those things. A settled quality. A sense of belonging in the moment that does not require the moment to be perfect before they can participate in it fully. Same room, same opportunity. Completely different experience. The difference between these two people has very little to do with talent. Very little to do with intelligence, or background, or the particular circumstances life handed them. It has everything to do with the picture they carry of themselves. Now here is where I want you to stay with me carefully, because this is where most conversations about personal growth make a wrong turn. They tell you to simply believe in yourself. They tell you to think positively, to affirm your greatness, to stand in front of a mirror and declare your worth until the declaration becomes reality. And while there is something genuine in that impulse, it misses the deeper mechanism entirely, because the mind is not persuaded by declarations it does not yet believe. You cannot talk your way past a self-image that has been reinforced by years of experience, years of internal commentary, years of quietly collected evidence that you have been presenting to yourself as proof of your limitations. The mind is far too thorough for that. It will listen to your declaration in the morning and then spend the rest of the day finding 17 pieces of evidence that contradict it. Not out of cruelty, out of consistency. It is simply doing what minds do, seeking confirmation of the picture it already holds. So the question is not how to override the picture. The question is how to change it. Maxwell Maltz was a plastic surgeon who spent his career reshaping the outer appearances of his patients. He was brilliant at his work. But what troubled him, what kept him thinking long after his patients had recovered and gone home, was a pattern he could not ignore. Some patients, after surgery, walked out into the world transformed, not just physically. Something in them had genuinely shifted. The new face had given them access to a new identity, and they inhabited it completely. But others, and this is what fascinated him, showed almost no change at all in how they moved through the world. The exterior had changed. The interior had not. They carried the same hesitations, the same contractions, the same invisible ceiling into their new faces as they had carried into the old ones. And Maltz realized something that redirected the rest of his professional life. The outer appearance was almost irrelevant. What governed a person's experience of themselves, and therefore their experience of everything, was the image they held on the inside. The mental picture, the quiet, persistent, largely unconscious portrait of who they believed themselves to be. Change that picture and everything changes. Leave it unchanged and nothing does. Not really. Now here is the practical truth that follows from this, and I want you to receive it not as philosophy but as instruction. Your self-image was not handed to you complete at birth. It was constructed, slowly, incrementally, through a lifetime of experiences and the conclusions you drew from them. Through the things people said to you, when you were young enough to accept them without examination. Through the attempts that didn't go as planned and the story you told yourself about what that meant. Through years of an internal conversation that you largely inherited rather than chose. Which means, and this is where the relief lies, it can be reconstructed. Not overnight. Not through a single dramatic revelation. But through the same process that built it in the first place. Consistently. Incrementally. One deliberate thought, one deliberate action, one deliberate interpretation of experience at a time. You begin by catching the old commentary when it runs, not fighting it, simply noticing it, holding it up to the light and asking, is this actually true or is this simply familiar? Then you begin, gently and persistently, to offer the mind a different picture, not a fantasy, a genuinely possible version of yourself, expanded slightly beyond where you currently sit, pointed in the direction you have chosen, grounded in the values you actually hold. And you feed that picture daily. You act from it before you feel it fully. You make decisions that the person in that picture would make, speak with the voice that person would use, enter rooms the way that person would enter them. Because here is what Maltz discovered, and what every person who has ever genuinely transformed themselves has confirmed through their own experience. The mind cannot tell the difference between a vividly imagined experience and a real one. When you consistently present it with a clear, detailed, emotionally real picture of the person you are becoming, it begins quietly and thoroughly to reorganize everything around that picture. Your habits shift. Your instincts shift. The ceiling that once felt permanent begins to feel like simply the floor of the next level. And one day, not with fanfare, not with a dramatic announcement, you walk into a room and something inside you expands rather than contracts. Not because the room has changed, because you have. The picture you hold of yourself is the most powerful creative force in your life. Choose it deliberately. Tend to it daily, and never for a single moment confuse who you have been with who you are in the process of becoming. Here is what I am asking you to do. Not someday, tonight. Before this day is over, write down the one thing you have been putting off because of fear. Just one. The conversation you haven't started. The idea you haven't launched. The commitment you haven't made. Write it down. Then write down why it matters to you. Not why it should matter. Why it does in your gut, in your bones, in the quiet place where you are most honest with yourself. And then tomorrow morning, when you wake, take one step toward it. Not the whole journey, one step. Make one call. Send one message. Write one paragraph. Walk through one door. Because courage, like fear, is also a habit. And habits are built one repetition at a time. You were not born to stand at the edge of your own life, watching from a safe distance. You were born to live it fully, boldly, with purpose burning in your chest like a steady flame. The light is yours. Turn it on. Good night and good thinking.